with James Heale, but I want to talk to you about a much more important issue of selling arms to Israel. You have suggested that ending selling arms to Israel will be shallow gesture politics. I wonder why you've used that language.
Well, because our direct arms exports to Israel account for 0.02% of Israel's arms imports. So it's about as close to being zero as it's possible to get in the real world. I'm not talking about your mathematical world, but 0.02% is a vanishingly small amount. Okay, we make bits for other things as well, so it's a bit more in reality. But our exports to Israel are tiny. And so just saying we're going to stop selling arms to Israel, if it gives people the impression that somehow Israel will suddenly not be able to prosecute this war again, it's just doolally. It's just not real politics. And
it's just virtue signaling, really, isn't it? It's not. And also, I would ask those people, and I will tomorrow, because I'm going to talk to a lawyer tomorrow. We're going to do a whole hour on Israel, because it's exactly 6 months tomorrow since the 7th of October terrorist attacks by Hamas. I wonder, where were the 600 lawyers when we're selling? We sell a lot more arms, for example, to Saudi Arabia, and the Houthi. Yemen is a big issue as well. Why is it that Israel is signalled out here?
Well, I mean, to be honest, Peter, in the last 10 years, I mean, one of the arguments I think also helps with this is that in the last 10 years, various sort of left-wing lobbies have demanded that we cut our ties with Saudi Arabia after the Khashoggi murder. They've demanded that we cut our ties with Erdogan, the Turkish dictator, and now they're demanding that we are weakening our ties with Israel. Where do these people think we get our intelligence from? The Middle East is a dangerous place. There's lots of badness that comes out of it. And actually, if we want influence and if we want intelligence and understanding what's happening, you have to double down on your relationships, not walk away in a huff. So much of Western policy making since the 1990s has been about sort of narcissistic gesture politics. I find it unbearable because actually we're losing out to authoritarian regimes like Russia, like China, who are not good, but who are thinking long-term about problems and at least trying to come out with long-term solutions. And they're not having their agenda dictated to by a sort of shallow need of some politicians to narcissistically, sort of vaingloriously denounce our allies in order to get by themselves into the news cycle. I'm sure it's well-intentioned. I just don't buy it. And I just think we need to think a little bit more about strategy. We need to have a robust debate in this country. But really, just sort of throwing our toys out the pram every time something we don't like, I just think it's nonsense.
Listen, I agree with every word of that, Bob. It is horrendous that those 3 military veterans were killed by what has been a mistake, a failure of process. There have been various people in the Israeli military who've been dismissed or censured as a result of what happened this week. There were 7 people in total, and we've got to remember that, 3 of them being British. But to me as well, Bob, it seems that suddenly people are interested in this issue now because 3 British people are dead. There are tens of thousands of innocent Gazans who are dead, and there are also thousands of Israelis who are dead. But it's because British people are dead that now people appear to care.
Yes, you're right. And I think that can come across a great sympathy and condolences to the 3 dead and indeed the 7 Westerners killed. How many Palestinian aid workers have been killed? Is it 170? Yeah, it's certainly like over 100. And please don't read this for my support for what Israel is doing, because I find it increasingly difficult to support what they are doing. What Hamas did in October last year was absolutely unforgivable. But there is also, so Israel has the right for military action, military necessity under international law, but it also has an obligation for humanity and proportionality. And proportionality seems to be going completely out the window. And what we've seen is that effectively to kill one low-level Hamas fighter, they were willing to destroy an entire convoy. It is, I don't defend that for 1 second. But I just think the way to deal with international affairs and to deal with countries who are allies and are sometimes doing the wrong thing and bad things is not just to walk off in a huff, but it's actually to engage more with them, to say, what are you doing? And there's other things. If we wanted to do a bit of gesture politics, let's kick out their ambassador. Let's withdraw our ambassador. But actually, most importantly, let's have a long-term plan. when are we going to recognize Palestine? Let's recognize the West Bank. Let's get this process up and running, and let's do stuff. And
that would be a huge thing to do. I just want to ask you about something on Times Radio that happened within the last 24 hours. Our colleagues over at Times Radio, the former US ambassador to the United Nations, national security advisor to Donald Trump, Ambassador John Bolton, accused the current UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres of being pro-Hamas. I mean, that's an incredibly strong thing to say. We also, Biden under pressure, or ceasefire talks, US at a high state of vigilance over the threat of Iranian retaliation. This is really serious stuff.
It is, and actually, look, with all these crises, they're pretty bad at the moment, both in Ukraine and the Middle East, but let's be under no doubt they could get worse. And the danger is that Hamas weakens Israel and then Hezbollah kicks off. And unfortunately, every time there's been a war, Iran's allies have used it to improve and perfect their tactics and their skills against Israel. And the West, I think one of their problems is since the 90s, the West has been too dependent on military technological advantage when there's more than one way to fight a war, especially if you're doing it in and around civilian populations. There's some ideas around hybrid war, etc. And unfortunately, Hezbollah now has the potential to do great damage to the state of Israel, and we have to think about that in the same way that the Russians could make things even worse in Ukraine if there's another round of mobilization, if they use tactical nuclear weapons. So that we are in a really dangerous situation in the world, but that's even more reason to actually think really carefully about what we're doing and not just think you do politics by gesture, because you don't.
Bob, you speak a lot of sense. Thank you very much indeed. That's Bob Seeley there, who's the Isle of Wight MP, Conservative MP. James Heale patiently listening to that. Your reaction to what Bob Seeley said there, please, James?
Yeah, I think Bob really speaks for a lot of the Conservative MPs right now, which is they feel increasingly uncomfortable about the way in which Israel is prosecuting this war. I was struck by what Bob said there about, blowing up an entire convoy of aid workers to get one low-level Hamas fighter. And so I do think this really ought to be a key warning moment for Israel. And it's something being reflected around the world as well. You look at the reaction to by the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk. You look at what the Australians have been saying, and of course Joe Biden. All of those lost a national of their country in that aid attack on Monday. And so really, I think Israel, this is a really wake up and smell the coffee moment, because you've got increasingly running out of patience in the international community. And also, of course, PT is facing domestic pressure at home. So these kind of attacks, which seem to be quite careless, as the former head of MI6, Alex Young, has said this week, really ought to be a warning sign for Israel.
Yeah, and it's interesting with those 600 lawyers, including Brenda Hale, up to her old tricks again, asking about the fact that we're selling arms to Israel and we could be part of war crimes and breaches of contributing to what could be a genocide, according to the UN. We've got John Bolton calling Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, pro-Hamas. I mean, the rhetoric has just been raised hugely in all of this. Do you think there is any chance that the United Kingdom will stop selling arms to Israel, as Bob Seeley points out, at 0.02% of their munitions?
I'm sceptical. I mean, we've done it before in 1982 and 2002, I believe, but I do think that we're not really in that current dynamic. And I think what's striking is that the voices in the Conservative Party calling on a halt to arms are mostly those outside Parliament, people like Nicholas Soames, people like Alan Duncan, for instance, rather than those who are actually MPs within Parliament. So I think for that reason, the government can ride out this pressure.